Malachi's hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped against the doorframe, but he didn't lift it. Not yet. His eyes stayed fixed on the woman who shouldn't exist, shouldn't be here, shouldn't know about this place that no map had ever marked. She was shivering. The detail struck him like a physical blow because it made her human, vulnerable, real. Water pooled at her bare feet, and he could see goosebumps rising along her arms. Whatever brought her here, she was suffering from it now. "Please," she whispered, and her voice carried a tremor that matched her body. "I need help." The words hit him harder than any gunshot. In 30 years. He'd heard his own voice so rarely that sometimes he forgot what it sounded like. But her voice, soft, desperate, unmistakably feminine, awakened something in him that felt dangerous. He wanted to step back, to slam the door, to pretend this moment had never happened. But his feet wouldn't move. His eyes traced the line of her shoulders, the way her wet hair fell across her back, the gentle curve of her waist. He'd forgotten that women looked like this, moved like this, spoke like this. "How did you find me?" The words came out rougher than he'd intended, his voice cracked from disuse. She turned more fully toward him then, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. Beautiful, but more than that, there was intelligence in her green eyes. Calculation. This wasn't some lost traveler stumbling through the wilderness. "I've been walking for 2 days," she said, but something in her tone didn't ring true. "My horse threw me near the river. I saw your smoke." His smoke. Malachi's jaw tightened. He'd been careful about that for 3 decades, keeping his fires small, his presence invisible. You couldn't see smoke from his chimney unless you knew exactly where to look, unless you were specifically searching for it. 2 days, he repeated, studying her face. Without food, without water, in this weather. He gestured at her wet dress. "Yet you look like you just fell in the river an hour ago." A flush crept up her neck, and he knew he'd caught her in the lie. But instead of backing down, she stepped closer to his porch, close enough that he could smell something beyond the forest rain on her skin. Something floral, expensive, not the scent of a woman who'd been wandering the wilderness for 2 days. "Does it matter how I got here?" she asked, and now her voice carried a different quality, not just desperate, but challenging. "I'm cold, I'm alone, and you're the only person for miles." She was right about that last part. They were alone out here, completely alone, and that realization sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the weather. Because if she was lying about how she'd gotten here, if she'd been sent to find him, then whoever sent her already knew she'd succeeded, and if they knew that, they'd be coming for him soon. The woman took another step forward, and despite every instinct screaming at him to retreat, Malachi found himself unable to look away from her approaching figure. After 30 years of solitude, the mere sight of her was intoxicating. But intoxication, he remembered, was just another word for poison. Against every fiber of his better judgment, Malachi stepped aside. 5 minutes, he said, his voice barely above a growl. "To warm yourself. Then you leave." She moved past him into the cabin, and the space that had felt perfectly adequate for one suddenly seemed impossibly small. Her presence filled every corner, changed the very air he breathed. The scent of rain and that mysterious floral fragrance followed her inside, mixing with the familiar smells of wood smoke and leather that had been his only companions for decades. "Violet," she'd whispered her name as she passed him, stood near his fireplace, her back to him again. The flames cast dancing shadows across her wet dress, and he found himself studying the curve of her spine, the way the fabric clung to her hips. He forced himself to look away, focusing instead on the questions multiplying in his mind. "There's a blanket on the chair," he said, pointing to the worn woolen throw he'd wrapped himself in countless winter evenings. "Use it." She turned to face him as she reached for the blanket, and he caught something in her expression, a flicker of satisfaction, as if something was going according to plan. The look vanished so quickly, he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. Almost. "You live here alone," she said. Not a question, but an observation. Her eyes swept across his one-room cabin, taking in every detail. The single bed, the small table, the shelves lined with books that had been his only conversation partners for 30 years. Obviously. For how long? The question was casual, conversational, but Malachi heard the sharp interest beneath it. She wanted information, and she was good at pretending it was innocent curiosity. Long enough. He moved to the window, positioning himself where he could watch both her and the forest beyond. Old habits. What about you? Where did you come from before your horse threw you? East, she said, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. I was traveling to California. East covers a lot of territory. She smiled, and the expression transformed her face completely. So does California. He'd forgotten how women could do that. Answer without answering. Deflect with charm. But he hadn't forgotten what it meant when someone evaded direct questions about their origins. Your dress, he said suddenly. It's not traveling clothes. Violet looked down at herself, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed genuinely surprised by his observation. The beige fabric was fine, expensive, not the practical cotton or rough wool a woman would choose for a long journey through dangerous territory. I had better clothes, she said after a moment. They were with my horse when he ran off. Another lie. He could hear it in the slight hesitation, see it in the way her fingers tightened on the blanket. Women who lost their horses and supplies didn't worry about their appearance. They worried about survival. This horse of yours, he said, moving away from the window. What did he look like? Black, with white markings on his face. And he threw you near the river. Which river? The questions came faster now, and he saw her eyes narrow slightly. She was realizing that his decades of solitude hadn't made him stupid or naive. If anything, the isolation had sharpened his instincts, made him more aware of inconsistencies, more suspicious of coincidences. Does it matter? She asked, echoing her earlier words. I'm here now. It matters because I know every river within 50 miles of here, and none of them are on any logical route from the east to California. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Violet's green eyes studied his face, and he could practically see her weighing options, calculating responses. Finally, she let the blanket slip from one shoulder, exposing the smooth line of her collarbone. Maybe I wasn't being entirely honest about my destination. The gesture was subtle, but unmistakable. A woman using her body to distract from uncomfortable questions. And despite 30 years of celibacy, despite every warning bell ringing in his mind, Malachi felt his pulse quicken, but he also felt something else. The cold certainty that this beautiful, mysterious woman represented the greatest danger he'd faced since fleeing into these woods 3 decades ago. Malachi forced himself to look away from her exposed shoulder, but the damage was done. Heat had flooded his system, and she knew it. He could see the satisfaction in her eyes, the calculated way she watched his reaction. Your 5 minutes are up, he said, his voice rougher than before. Are they? She let the blanket slip a little more, revealing the delicate curve where her neck met her shoulder. You seem like a man who keeps his word. Did you really mean just 5 minutes? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made his mouth go dry. 30 years of celibacy had left him unprepared for this kind of warfare, and she knew it. I meant it. But he didn't move toward the door, and they both knew why. Despite every rational thought screaming at him to get her out of his sanctuary, despite the certainty that she represented danger, he couldn't bring himself to send her back into the storm that was now howling outside his walls. As if reading his thoughts, she glanced toward the window where rain lashed against the glass. It's gotten worse out there. She was right. The weather had turned violent while they'd been talking, the kind of storm that could kill someone caught in the open, even if she was lying about everything else. Sending her out in this would be murder. You can stay until morning, he heard himself say, but you sleep on the floor. She nodded, but there was something in her expression that suggested his capitulation had been inevitable, expected, as if she'd known exactly which strings to pull to keep herself safe inside his cabin. Thank you, she said, and for the first time her gratitude sounded genuine. I know this isn't easy for you. You don't know anything about me. I know you've been alone for a very long time. Her voice was soft now, almost gentle. I can see it in the way you look at me, like you're not sure I'm real. The observation hit too close to home. He was looking at her that way, had been since she'd first appeared on his porch. After 3 decades without seeing another human face, she seemed almost like an apparition, too vivid and alive to be possible. I know you've been hurt, she continued, taking a step closer. Badly. Otherwise you wouldn't have hidden yourself away like this. Stop. The word came out sharper than he'd intended, but she'd crossed a line. His past, his reasons for being here, weren't her business. I'm sorry, she said, but she didn't step back. I just recognized the look. I've seen it in my own mirror. Despite himself, He found his eyes searching her face for signs of whatever pain she claimed to understand. And there, beneath the calculated seduction and mysterious lies, he caught a glimpse of something real, a shadow of old hurt, carefully hidden but unmistakably present. The discovery shook him more than her beauty had. Pain was something he understood, something he'd lived with so long it had become part of him. If she truly carried that same burden, if she knew what it felt like to have your life carved in half by loss, what happened to you? He asked before he could stop himself. She smiled, but this time it wasn't seductive or calculated. It was sad, resigned, the expression of someone who'd learned that some questions were too dangerous to answer honestly. The same thing that happened to you, I suspect. I trusted the wrong person. Thunder crashed outside, making them both jump. In that moment of shared startlement, their eyes met and held, and Malachi felt something pass between them. Not attraction this time, but recognition. The understanding between two people who'd been broken by betrayal. But recognition was dangerous too, he realized, because it made him want to believe her, want to trust her. And the last time he'd trusted a beautiful woman with secrets, it had destroyed everything he'd ever loved. The night stretched between them like a taut wire. Malachi gave her his only pillow and extra blankets, then settled into the hard wooden chair by the fire, his rifle within easy reach. Sleep was impossible, not just because of the discomfort, but because every fiber of his being remained acutely aware of her presence. She lay curled on the floor near the fireplace, her breathing deep and even, too even. He'd spent enough sleepless nights in hostile territory to recognize when someone was pretending to sleep. She was listening, waiting, planning something. I know you're awake, he said quietly. A pause, then a soft laugh. So are you. She sat up, the blanket pooling around her waist. The firelight painted golden highlights across her skin, and he had to force himself to focus on her eyes instead of the way the thin fabric of her dress had shifted in sleep. Tell me about her, Violet said. Her? The woman who hurt you. The reason you've been hiding in these woods. The directness of it caught him off guard. He'd expected more lies, more seduction, not this quiet interest in his personal hell. I don't talk about the past. Neither do I, usually. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like a shawl. But we're two people who've been running from something, stuck in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Seems like a good time to break old habits. You first. She considered this, tilting her head as if weighing how much truth she could afford to share. His name was Marcus. Rich, powerful, charming. Everything a young woman thinks she wants. What did he do? He made me believe I was special. Her voice carried a bitter edge now. Convinced me to give up everything. My family, my reputation, my independence. I thought he was going to marry me. Malachi felt his chest tighten. He knew this story, had lived a version of it himself. Instead, he married someone else, someone who could advance his political career. Left me with nothing but scandal and shame. She looked directly at him. That's when I learned that powerful men collect beautiful things, but they don't keep them. The parallel was too close, too familiar. His own betrayal had followed similar lines. Trust given, promises broken. A life demolished by someone who'd claimed to love him. Your turn, she said softly. For 30 years he'd kept that story locked away, never speaking it aloud. But something about the darkness, about her own admission of pain, loosened the words from his throat. Her name was Catherine, Senator's daughter. I was young, stupid, thought love could bridge any gap between our worlds. What happened? I found out she was using me to get information about my business dealings. Everything I'd told her in confidence, every detail about my investments and partnerships, she'd been passing along to her father and his associates. The old rage stirred in his chest. They used that information to destroy my competitors, manipulate markets, ruin good men. Violet was quiet for a long moment. You were in business in Washington? The question was casual, but something about it made his instincts flare. Why? Just trying to understand. You don't seem like a businessman. What do I seem like? She studied his face in the firelight, taking in the weathered features, the calloused hands, the way he held himself with unconscious awareness of his surroundings. Someone who's forgotten who he used to be. The observation stung because it was true. The man he'd been before Catherine's betrayal, ambitious, trusting, eager to build something meaningful in the world, had died the day he'd learned the truth. What sat in this chair now was something harder, more careful, carved down to the essential elements needed for survival. Maybe that's for the best, he said. Is it? She leaned forward slightly, her eyes intent on his face. Because the man I'm looking at seems like he was meant for more than hiding in the woods. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Her voice carried a strange urgency now, as if something important hung in the balance of this conversation. Malachi Brooks, you built half the railroads between here and the Mississippi. You employed hundreds of men, moved mountains, connected territories that had never been connected before. The blood turned to ice in his veins. She'd spoken his full name, not just the first name he'd given her, but his complete identity. And she knew about his work, his achievements, details that should have been buried with his old life. He was on his feet in an instant, the rifle in his hands, pointed directly at her heart. Who sent you? If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 10 a.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next chapter, because out here in the West, no one waits around. Violet didn't flinch at the sight of the rifle barrel pointed at her chest. Instead, she slowly raised her hands, palms open, her green eyes never leaving his face. No one sent me, Malachi. Liar. His finger found the trigger, and 30 years of suppressed paranoia flooded his system. You know things about me that died when I disappeared. My full name, my business dealings, information that only my enemies would have kept alive. You're right, she said quietly. I do know things about you, but not because someone sent me to find you. Then how? She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her wrestling with a decision. Whatever she was about to tell him would change everything between them, and they both knew it. Because I've been looking for you for 15 years. The confession hit him like a physical blow. 15 years. That meant she'd started searching for him when she was barely more than a girl, long before whatever betrayal had driven her to his doorstep tonight. Why? Because you're the only person who ever stood up to them. Her voice carried a desperate intensity now. The only one who fought back against the corruption, who tried to expose what they were doing. His mind raced, trying to place her in the context of his old life. She would have been young then, maybe 13 or 14 when his world had collapsed. Too young to have been directly involved in the political machinery that had destroyed him. I don't know you, he said, but doubt was creeping into his voice. You knew my father. The words fell between them like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread in all directions. His father, not Marcus, the man who'd betrayed her, but someone from Malachi's past. Who was he? Senator James Hartford. The rifle wavered in his hands. James Hartford. The name brought back a flood of memories, most of them painful. Hartford had been one of the few honest men in Washington, a rare politician who'd actually tried to serve his constituents rather than enrich himself. Hartford's dead, he said. Has been for over a decade. I know. They killed him. He died of a heart attack. They killed him, she repeated, her voice steady despite the tears that had begun to slide down her cheeks. Just like they killed the others who tried to help you expose the railroad scandal. Just like they would have killed you if you hadn't disappeared. The railroad scandal. She was talking about the corruption he'd uncovered. The web of bribery and manipulation that had stretched from local officials all the way to the Senate. He'd tried to expose it, had gathered evidence, built a case that would have brought down some of the most powerful men in the country. Instead, Catherine had betrayed him, his evidence had disappeared, and he'd fled into the wilderness rather than face the assassins who'd been sent to silence him permanently. Your father never tried to help me, he said, but even as he spoke the words, he was remembering Hartford's quiet support. The way the senator had tried to shield him from the worst of the political retaliation. He did what he could, but it wasn't enough to save you, and it wasn't enough to save himself. She wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand. After he died, I made it my mission to find out what really happened, and every trail led back to you. So you tracked me down. Why? What do you want from me? I want justice for my father, and I want the men who destroyed both our lives to pay for what they did. The rifle felt heavy in his hands now, the weight of 30 years of running suddenly unbearable. She was asking him to go back, to confront the past he'd spent decades trying to forget, to become the man he'd been before fear and betrayal had carved him down to nothing. Those men are probably dead by now, he said. It's been 30 years. Some of them are, but not all. Her eyes blazed with determination. Marcus Whitfield, the man who betrayed me, he's Senator Catherine's son, and he's been using his mother's information, the secrets she stole from you, to build his own empire. The connection snapped into place with sickening clarity. Catherine's son, carrying on his mother's work, using the intelligence she'd gathered from him to maintain power across generations. He's running for governor of Colorado next year, Violet continued, and if he wins, he'll have the power to bury the truth forever. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but inside the cabin, Malachi felt like he was standing in the eye of a hurricane that had been building for 30 years. Violet didn't flinch at the sight of the rifle barrel pointed at her chest. Instead, she slowly raised her hands, palms open, her green eyes never leaving his face. No one sent me. Malachi. Liar. His finger found the trigger, and 30 years of suppressed paranoia flooded his system. You know things about me that died when I disappeared. My full name, my business dealings, information that only my enemies would have kept alive. You're right, she said quietly. I do know things about you, but not because someone sent me to find you. Then how? She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her wrestling with a decision. Whatever she was about to tell him would change everything between them, and they both knew it. Because I've been looking for you for 15 years. The confession hit him like a physical blow. 15 years. That meant she'd started searching for him when she was barely more than a girl, long before whatever betrayal had driven her to his doorstep tonight. Why? Because you're the only person who ever stood up to them. Her voice carried a desperate intensity now. The only one who fought back against the corruption, who tried to expose what they were doing. His mind raced, trying to place her in the context of his old life. She would have been young then, maybe 13 or 14 when his world had collapsed. Too young to have been directly involved in the political machinery that had destroyed him. I don't know you, he said, but doubt was creeping into his voice. You knew my father. The words fell between them like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread in all directions. His father, not Marcus, the man who'd betrayed her, but someone from Malachi's past. Who was he? Senator James Hartford. The rifle wavered in his hands. James Hartford. The name brought back a flood of memories, most of them painful. Hartford had been one of the few honest men in Washington, a rare politician who'd actually tried to serve his constituents rather than enrich himself. Hartford's dead, he said. Has been for over a decade. I know. They killed him. He died of a heart attack. They killed him, she repeated, her voice steady, despite the tears that had begun to slide down her cheeks. Just like they killed the others who tried to help you expose the railroad scandal. Just like they would have killed you if you hadn't disappeared. The railroad scandal. She was talking about the corruption he'd uncovered, the web of bribery and manipulation that had stretched from local officials all the way to the Senate. He'd tried to expose it, had gathered evidence, built a case that would have brought down some of the most powerful men in the country. Instead, Catherine had betrayed him, his evidence had disappeared, and he'd fled into the wilderness rather than face the assassins who'd been sent to silence him permanently. Your father never tried to help me, he said, but even as he spoke the words, he was remembering Hartford's quiet support, the way the senator had tried to shield him from the worst of the political retaliation. He did what he could, but it wasn't enough to save you, and it wasn't enough to save himself. She wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand. After he died, I made it my mission to find out what really happened, and every trail led back to you. So you tracked me down. Why? What do you want from me? I want justice for my father, and I want the men who destroyed both our lives to pay for what they did. The rifle felt heavy in his hands now, the weight of 30 years of running suddenly unbearable. She was asking him to go back, to confront the past he'd spent decades trying to forget, to become the man he'd been before fear and betrayal had carved him down to nothing. Those men are probably dead by now, he said. It's been 30 years. Some of them are, but not all. Her eyes blazed with determination. Marcus Whitfield, the man who betrayed me, he's Senator Catherine's son, and he's been using his mother's information, the secrets she stole from you, to build his own empire. The connection snapped into place with sickening clarity. Catherine's son, carrying on his mother's work, using the intelligence she'd gathered from him to maintain power across generations. He's running for governor of Colorado next year, Violet continued, and if he wins, He'll have the power to bury the truth forever. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but inside the cabin, Malachi felt like he was standing in the eye of a hurricane that had been building for 30 years. The morning sun filtered through the cabin windows, revealing a world washed clean by the storm. Malachi had spent the remaining hours of darkness weighing his decision, studying Violet's face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was another elaborate trap. But all he saw was exhaustion and desperate hope. "The evidence," he said finally. "Where is it?" Her relief was immediate and unmistakable. 2 miles north of here, hidden in a cave near the old mining claims. I've been using it as a base camp for the past 3 weeks while I searched for your cabin." 3 weeks. She'd been living in the wilderness, tracking him with the patience of a hunter. The realization stirred something between admiration and unease. "You came prepared for a long search." "I've been preparing for 15 years. She stood, folding the blanket with careful precision. "Everything I've done since my father died has been leading to this moment. And if I say no? If I decide that 30 years of peace is worth more than your quest for justice?" Her face went very still. "Then I'll go after Marcus alone, and I'll probably die trying." The simple honesty of it hit him harder than any manipulation could have. She wasn't threatening him or trying to guilt him into compliance. She was simply stating a fact. With or without his help, she intended to see this through to the end. "Show me," he said. They left the cabin together, Malachi's rifle slung across his back, his instincts sharp after a night of revelations. The forest felt different with another person moving through it, less like a sanctuary and more like potential hunting grounds where every shadow could hide a threat. The cave was exactly where she'd said it would be, tucked into a rocky outcropping that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know precisely where to look. Inside, she'd created a makeshift camp, bedroll, supplies, and most importantly, a leather satchel that looked like it had survived decades of careful handling. "My father gave this to me the night before he died," she said, lifting the satchel with reverent care. "He said if anything happened to him, I should find Malachi Brooks and give him these documents." She opened the satchel and spread the contents across a flat rock. What Malachi saw made his breath catch in his throat. Letters and handwriting he recognized. Correspondence between Catherine and her political allies discussing how best to use the information they'd extracted from him. Financial records showing bribes paid to judges, senators, railroad commissioners. A detailed plan for eliminating witnesses, with his name at the top of the list. And at the bottom of the pile, a letter in Senator Hartford's own hand, addressed to him personally. With trembling fingers, Malachi unfolded the letter and read, "My dear Brooks, if you are reading this, then my daughter has succeeded where I failed. The evidence contained here proves what we both suspected. The corruption goes deeper than either of us imagined. Catherine Whitfield was not working alone, but as part of a network that continues to operate today. They killed me because I got too close to the truth. They tried to kill you for the same reason. But perhaps together, you and Violet can finish what we started. The choice is yours. But know that justice delayed is not justice denied. It is only justice waiting for the right moment to strike. Your friend in truth, James Hartford." "He knew," Malachi whispered. "He knew everything, and he knew that someday, someone would need to complete his work." Violet's voice was soft but determined. "The question is, are you ready to be that someone?" Malachi looked at the evidence spread before him, 30 years of secrets finally brought into the light. All the proof he'd ever dreamed of having, handed to him by the daughter of the one honest man who'd tried to help him. The hermit who'd hidden in these woods wanted to refuse, wanted to burn the documents and send her away, wanted to preserve the fragile peace he'd built in his isolation. But the man he'd been before, the man who'd believed that truth mattered, that corruption should be fought regardless of the cost, that man was stirring to life again. "Marcus Whitfield," he said. "When does he officially announce his candidacy?" "Next month, in Denver." Her eyes blazed with anticipation. "There's going to be a grand rally, all the important people in attendance. Then that's where we'll expose him, in front of everyone who matters, with evidence so overwhelming that not even his mother's network can bury it." For the first time since she'd appeared on his doorstep, Violet smiled without calculation or seduction, just pure, fierce joy. "Does this mean you're with me?" Malachi looked around the cave that had sheltered her lonely vigil, then back at the woman who'd waited 15 years for this moment, the woman who'd risked everything to find him and drag him back into a fight he'd abandoned decades ago. "It means," he said, "that it's time to stop running." 2 months later, Marcus Whitfield stood at the podium in Denver's Grand Opera House, basking in the applause of Colorado's political elite. His campaign for governor was ahead in every poll, his future as bright as the gaslights illuminating the ornate theater. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, his voice carrying easily to the packed balconies, "together we will build a Colorado free from corruption, where honest men can prosper and justice prevails." The irony was almost too perfect. Malachi sat in the back row, his weathered hands steady on the leather satchel that contained 30 years of buried truth. Beside him, Violet wore a simple blue dress that transformed her from the mysterious woman who'd appeared at his cabin into someone who could blend seamlessly into Denver society. They'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, copying documents, reaching out to sympathetic newspaper editors, building a network of people hungry for the truth. The evidence was no longer contained in a single fragile collection. It had been distributed, verified, and prepared for simultaneous release across multiple channels. "The time is now," Violet whispered. Malachi rose from his seat. Around him, heads began to turn as people recognized something familiar about the tall, lean figure moving down the aisle. Whispers followed in his wake. Speculation, recognition, disbelief. By the time he reached the stage, the entire theater had fallen silent. Marcus Whitfield's confident smile faltered as he saw the man approaching. There was something in the stranger's weathered face, something in his purposeful stride, that suggested this was not part of the planned program. "Excuse me," Marcus said into the microphone, "but I believe there's been some mistake." "No mistake," Malachi said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He climbed the steps to the stage, and now the whispers in the audience became a low rumble of confusion and anticipation. People in the front rows could see his face clearly now, could match it against old newspaper photographs they might have seen decades ago. "Ladies and gentlemen," Malachi said, taking the microphone from Marcus's suddenly nerveless fingers, "my name is Malachi Brooks. Some of you might remember me from 30 years ago, when I tried to expose the railroad corruption that was bleeding this territory dry." The rumble became a roar. Marcus stepped backward, his face pale, but there was nowhere for him to go. The theater was packed, the exits blocked by curious crowds. The attention of every important person in Colorado focused on this unexpected drama. I was silenced then by people who valued power more than truth. People who used beautiful women to steal secrets. Who bribed judges and senators, who murdered honest men who got in their way. Malachi's eyes found Marcus's terrified face. "People like your mother, Catherine Whitfield." "You're insane," Marcus gasped, but his voice cracked on the words. "Am I?" Malachi reached into the satchel and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Then perhaps you can explain these letters, written in your mother's own hand, detailing how she extracted information from me and passed it along to her conspirators." He held up the papers, and camera flashes exploded throughout the theater as newspaper photographers captured the moment. "Perhaps you can explain these financial records, showing bribes paid to eliminate my competitors, or this assassination list, with my name at the very top." Marcus made a desperate lunge for the documents, but Malachi had spent 30 years staying alive in hostile territory. He sidestepped easily, letting Marcus stumble past him toward the edge of the stage. "And perhaps," Malachi continued, his voice growing stronger with each revelation, "you can explain how a young politician with no business experience managed to build a fortune using the exact same methods, targeting the exact same markets that these documents describe." The audience was on its feet now, some people shouting questions, others demanding answers, the careful order of Marcus's campaign rally dissolving into chaos. Through it all, Violet sat in her seat, watching with quiet satisfaction as 15 years of patient planning finally bore fruit. Marcus Whitfield's political career was over. The network of corruption that had destroyed her father was finally exposed, and the man who'd been hiding in the wilderness for 30 years had reclaimed not just his voice, but his purpose. In the weeks that followed, the scandal would spread across every newspaper in the country. Investigations would be launched, arrests would be made, and long-buried truths would finally see the light of day. But in this moment, standing on the stage where Marcus Whitfield's ambitions had died, Malachi felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 decades. The deep satisfaction of justice finally served. He looked out at the chaotic crowd, then back at Violet, who was now standing and applauding with tears streaming down her face. The hermit was gone forever. In his place stood a man who'd remembered what he was fighting for. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale, where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.